Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when you're watching the video. If you would like to follow along, and I highly recommend that you do, go ahead and open up your PowerPoint folder in Blackboard to the PowerPoint labeled Colonial Era. So we're going to be going over the Colonial Era. I'm going to be using my computer screen over here next to me to kind of lead you through the slides. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to try to make these fairly compact. Normally this would be a couple of lectures in class, but I'm trying to condense them down for your time, to be respectful of your time, and of course to not just drone on. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so the first roughly 5 chapters of the book will be covered in this lecture. And again, this lecture is going to try to be condensed down. So it's not going to be every little detail. It's not going to be everything from the exam, but we'll do our best we can to cover all the information and make it to where the main ideas are kind of pulled together. So on the first slide you have of your PowerPoint, it's talking about the Bering Strait being the potential place where people first came across into the continent to settle. We assume those to be what would become called Native Americans. This took place thousands of years ago, and I do have on my PowerPoint, I try to show both sides on pretty much everything. And so you'll see that there is a 10,000-year-old date for those who are of evolutionary mindset, and for those that are more along the lines of the creation, that would be approximately 4,000 years ago for those of you folks who believe in a creation viewpoint. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Native Americans here in America. So there's going to be distinct cultures in America, these Native American people that are going to develop their own cultures. They're going to develop along varied lines. You have your Southwest group, you have your Great Plains group, you have your Eastern tribes. They are all going to take advantage of the resources that are available to them. For instance, in the Southwest, you have a lot of folks who practice agriculture. On the Great Plains, as these are probably the most famous of the Indian types of that time. They're the ones that will eventually be on horseback and hunting buffalo. But originally they were hunting buffalo simply on foot. And it may sound funny or amusing, it's not supposed to, but the way that they would kill buffalo back in the old days before they had the horse was to actually run them off of cliffs and kill buffalo in that fashion. Eastern tribes are going to take advantage of waterways, rivers, and things of that nature, be more along the lines of fishermen. And these are the folks that are going to come into contact with your colonial folks early on in the early 1600s. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about exploration. So we're on the next slide on leading to exploration. One of the things that you guys are going to read a little bit about, not a whole lot in the textbook, but if you look at your maps, you'll see that the Europeans were trying to trade with Asia. They're trying to trade with China, current day China. They're trying to trade with folks over in that area, India, and the spices were very popular for the Europeans. And so they would trade an overland route, which means simply that they were walking across the area or maybe riding in caravans with horses, perhaps camels, whatnot, to get over there and load up and then come back. And these caravans were very popular. The rise of Islam is going to lead to eventual stopping of those caravans. Conflict between Christianity and Islam will lead to the closure of the road that is known as the Silk Road. And so they're going to be trying to find new ways to get over to that part of the world to trade. So we've got really one other option. We can either defeat the Muslims in battle, which would prove to be very difficult, or we can just try to bypass them completely and take a water route, which is what they're going to try to do. It's going to take a lot of attempts to get over there, and I'll let you kind of go through the list here. But the main thing that we want to notice here is that eventually they're going to be successful in advancing their what we would call maritime trades. Their shipping is going to become much more advanced. Instead of just hugging the coast, eventually they'll be more I guess you could call it more adventurous, and head straight across the ocean. So let's go to some more factors. We have mercantilism, which is the belief that all wealth is limited and that the only way to make money is basically take it from other people. That is not the case. There is a limited amount of gold in the world, but mercantilism was flawed because, as you can see today, that the wealth of the world is pretty much whatever we want it to be. We'll make more and more and more money. It's complicated. Take that up with your economics professor. Technology, like I was talking about before, you have advances in maritime trade. You have the compass. You have rudimentary globes. You have improvements on ships like rudders and steering controls. And of course, the more maps you have, the more accurate you can be. So let's talk about Portugal quickly. This is another slide. We have the Portuguese explorers. You don't have to know a lot about Portuguese explorers. I'm not going to bore you to tears with pre-colonial history. That's really not my forte. I'm more into American history, which starts really with the American Revolution and the formation of the country. So we're going to go over this, but I don't expect you to know this in any kind of detail, so please don't get overwhelmed when I go through this. So Portugal was a very powerful maritime country early on. They were powerful because their entire country was basically a coastline within Spain. Look up on the map, and you can see where Portugal is located today, same place. And the folks who lived in Portugal were very, very skilled in shipping, in anything that has to do with a boat. They were good at it. And so you can see early on that Portugal has becomes a very big player in the whole grand scheme of things. So we have Prince Henry the Navigator, we have Diaz, and we have Vasco da Gama, who are going to make some pretty big inroads in the shipping trade. So let's move on to the one that we all want to talk about, the one we all care about, is Christopher Columbus, who tends to be in the news lately, and we're going to have a little assignment over that to try to determine whether this guy deserves his statues or maybe not. So that'll be coming up on reading excerpts. I'll give you more details about that one later on. It'll be found through our announcements boards, where I'll be putting out all our information for our class with regards to what to do and when to do it. Okay, so Christopher Columbus. If you've been keeping up with the news, you've heard that this is a really bad guy. And if you've been keeping up with the news, you've probably heard that he's a really great guy. He did do a lot of great things, but he also did a lot of controversial stuff. But the one thing that we give him credit for is finding, as a European, the North American continent. Well, I guess I should say America in general. He finds, actually, Central America. He lands they believe he lands in Haiti. But he makes several journeys over here, 4 trips to the Americas, and is credited for finding this place. That's why we give him a lot of credit, because of what he did. Now, you got to understand, nobody had ever tried to do this before. Sailing across the ocean was just considered a death sentence, and he decides to, try to get funding to have this trip. Of course, as it is with most cases, the reason for doing that was to become rich, and for the most part, he was very successful. Monetarily, that kind of fades toward the end of his life, but he was successful. He did find a new land to us. If you're of European background, if you're not, then maybe not so much. But nonetheless, Christopher Columbus is going to head out, and he's going to discover America, and that's what we give him credit for today. Now, what that leads to, because he was working for the Spanish, he was Italian, but he was working for the Spanish. What that's going to lead to is the Spanish are going to become early players in the New World, and they're going to become very wealthy, and they're going to have a claim to a lot of territory in this so-called New World. They're going to have claim to virtually all of South America, most of Central America, and even a good chunk of North America. Now, we'll get into some of the maps later on, and you'll see how this is going to change over time as the United States grows, but that's way down the road, okay? So let's talk about a couple of specifics. First of all, St. Augustine. St. Augustine becomes the first permanent settlement in the New World. I'm sorry, let me restate that. St. Augustine becomes the first permanent settlement in the current day United States. Okay, and I had a test question on that back in the day, and I'm not sure if it's going to make it into our test for this semester or not, but that was one of those little give me's right there. So if you're listening, then there's a give me question. Hernan Cortez, the conquistadors, are going to come over and they're going to start conquering territory from Native Americans. And there's a lot of reasons why this is going to happen. You've heard about disease. You've heard about how that's going to decimate the Indian population. There's a lot of different theories about how all that's going to go down and how many Indians are actually going to die. But one of the things you've got to understand is the three major Indian tribes in the Americas were, let's just say they weren't very nice to their neighbors. And so they make natural enemies. And these natural enemies are going to side with these Europeans to conquer them from the inside and from the outside. And so that becomes a complicated scenario for these folks. For the Indians that are being conquered, that is. Because you could have 200 Spanish soldiers conquering over 1 million Aztecs, and it sounds impossible, but it's because these Spaniards were making friends with the Indian tribes that had been subjected by, say, the Aztecs. Same thing's going to take place in South America and other parts of Central America. And the way the Spanish set up their colonies is they're going to use Indians basically for forced labors. And you see a term on the PowerPoint slide, this encomienda, and that was the way the Spanish would set up these massive plantations and take advantage of Indian labor. Because let's just face it, these folks that lived here in America, these Native Americans, in many cases weren't even considered fully human, okay? And they were subjugated, and there's no excuse for that. That's history. It happened, and we have to face our history and, kind of point out, hey, this wasn't really a great thing that we did here, or maybe this over here could have been done a little bit differently. You're going to notice I'm not going to bash everything that we've done in history because, the best thing we can do with history is to learn from it. So let's keep going here. Spain, as I've mentioned, has become super powerful. As a matter of fact, Spain becomes the most powerful nation in the world, and it's going to stay that way for a very long time. Your next slide talks about the Columbian Exchange. Take a look at things that are coming into the New World from the Old World, which would be Europe, and into the New World, which would be of the Americas, and take a look at stuff that's coming out of the New World into Europe and back and forth. It's a very interesting thing. Such as horses, that's a big one. There were no rats here before we got here, we as in Europeans, so that's interesting. And of course, religion is going to be a big player in that as well, because that religion is going to make a huge impact in the settlement of the colonies and of the way the Spanish are going to try to convert these Native Americans. Because you have a conflict between the government leaders, who many of them were very prejudiced against the Indians, and the religious leaders who saw these as potential souls to save for the church, and then you have a conflict is going to be resulting out of that as well. Okay, let's talk briefly about the French. The French are going to come in after the Spanish, and they're not going to be nearly as successful, but they're going to be way ahead of the British. The British are kind of at the tail end of this whole thing. The French come in, they're exploring, but they're staying away from the Spanish. The one thing that the British, the French, the Dutch, everybody has to do is to stay away from the Spanish territories that have been claimed by Spain, because the Spanish will blow you out of the water if you get into their area, so keep that in mind. So the French are headed up toward Canada, current-day Canada, St. Lawrence River, and they are headed up to Hudson Bay, all that area. They're looking at for themselves to potentially set up colonies. Now, we'll say one thing real quick. The French weren't setting up colonies in the same way the Spanish were. The Spanish are just moving in. They're moving in. They're bringing families with them. They're settling. The French are going to be coming in, and it's like mostly young single men that are working, and they are basically coming in to make a living and then go back home with their riches that they make off of fur trapping and whatnot. The Dutch, I mentioned the Dutch just a minute ago. The Dutch come in. They have limited success. They do set up some colonies, and they are going to be in current day New York State and New Jersey. Now, their colonies are going to be very short-lived because eventually the British are going to come in and they're going to kind of take those guys over. But you have Henry Hudson working for the Dutch. You have the New Netherland Company, which is going to be the company that's founded to set up these colonies. And eventually you'll have New Amsterdam founded, which is going to be the name of their colony. And New Amsterdam will be basically that whole stretch between New York and New Jersey. And they're going to control this area for about 40 years or so. The Dutch are here. But that's all going to change when we get to the British. Now, I'm going to end this video, and we're going to have a part 2 to this video, so we don't get these huge file sizes that may be hard to download. So we'll be back for part 2, which is going to pick up with a slide on the British versus the Spanish.